Okay, well, good evening and welcome everyone to the American Cetacean Society San Francisco Bay Chapter's September 2025 speaker event. And I'm Susan Hopp, board member responsible for our speaker program. And with me is fellow board member Anjali Mishra. For anyone new to the American Cetacean Society, we are a chapter within a national organization that is the oldest nonprofit dedicated to the protection of whales, dolphins, porpoises, and their habitat. And we do this through education, community engagement, and awarding grants towards cetacean research. It is your donations that truly support our mission and enable us to put on our monthly talks, create our online courses, and give grants. And I do want to acknowledge the loyal regular attendees to these monthly talks who donate month over month. And we know who you are and we appreciate it so very much. And I want to underscore that the donations do fuel our research grants. Very soon, we will be announcing our 2026 grant award applications. And with what is going on with within our national politics, the gutting of ocean research budgets and policy shifts, research grants are really an important backstop. So please know your giving dollars are being put to good use. And it is easy to donate on our website if you haven't at time of registration. And another exciting announcement is that our latest online class, Marine Wildlife in the Gulf of the Greater Farallones, starts tomorrow evening and will go on for 6 Wednesdays. This is a new class created by our esteemed board members, Susan Sherman and Mark Weber. And as a testament to the quality, we have several returning students from our 2024 class. You can still sign up and we will put the link in the chat. We are recording tonight's presentation. Please put your questions in the Q&A. That's better than the chat. And we will field them after the presentation. Tonight's talk is our humpback whales, locals, but not locals only. And from the number of registrations, which is a new record of over 200, our speaker, his work, and his reputation is clearly widely admired. Ted Cheeseman is the co-founder and director of Happywhale, a research collaboration and citizen science web platform that is transforming data science for tracking individual whales. Ted recently completed a PhD studying North Pacific humpback whale populations. In a broad collaborative study, AI technology was leveraged, resulting in the identification and tracking of almost every living whale in the North Pacific. The study revealed a previously underappreciated major mortality event where 1/3 of Hawaii's humpback population was lost to the impacts of a 3-year marine heat wave. Ted is particularly inspired to develop technology that fosters research collaboration, access to previously inaccessible learning, and building community around ocean ecosystems. Ted, we appreciate you being here, and based on the registrations, you are succeeding in your goal to indeed build and further community around the ocean ecosystems we love and depend on. And with that, I hand it over to you. Thank you again.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And it's wonderful to be here. I wish instead of talking to screens, I was talking to you all out among whales. But let's see if we can get this working. You see my screen, I think?
Yes.
Yeah. Oops. Except for now it went and switched. Which screen?
Yeah,
Or
right now we're actually seeing your notes too.
Oh, fail. See, we tested it and it did the wrong thing. Okay. Stop share. So let's try that again. Desktop Up to, maybe I pushed the wrong button, could be.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think you're now seeing the right screen, and I
Um,
just need to.
yeah.
No, again,
Perfect.
so sorry.
Oh, no, it's looking good. Oh, just
Wait.
when you went to slideshow, that looked good, Ted. For
Oh,
me,
okay.
yeah, that's
So you're
we
not seeing my notes.
no,
Good,
just seeing the
because I
first
don't read the
one.
notes anyway.
No.
Um, brilliant. All right, so super delighted to share this all with you, and it's pretty fresh stuff. Yes, I finished my PhD. It's a funny space though, because I actually thought I finished my PhD over a year ago, but the review folks at the school said otherwise, and I only finally got the degree conferred in July. Um, and but yet there's actually one chapter of my thesis that's not yet published, and as you can see, it's about humpback whales. And so I want to take you on kind of a little walk through a bit of what I've done, what we've learned, what we're still trying to learn and figure out, and a lot of what's just really new and fresh here, in remarkably, the most studied large cetacean in the world, where there's still just these huge spaces in which there's just vast unknowns. So so I call this humpback whales locals, but not locals only, because well, so Happy Whale, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. I'll talk more about the mechanics of it along the way. But with Happywhale, as you said, Susan, as we have managed to identify and bring together data sets, including almost every living whale in the North Pacific, and then quite a lot around the rest of the world. And in this, one of the oftentimes most noteworthy things we've been finding is, oh wow, look at this whale. This whale was first seen in the in there's a well-known whale named Top Gun, that's got this horribly killer whale scarred tail that is often seen in the Santa Barbara Channel. And we found that whale was first encountered in the Commander Islands off of Russia. And noteworthy things like that, like, wow, what's going on here? Maybe these whales aren't really following the migratory patterns that we thought they were. But I'm going to jump to the punchline here, which is that they do follow very consistent migratory patterns, just not everyone all the time. So there's a lot more story in that. So I'm going to kind of take it away here. And first things first, I mean, I guess I just want to step back for a moment and appreciate the scale and the space of what we get here when we're exploring and studying humpback whales. This is, not my most beautiful picture, much less the most beautiful picture of humpback whales. I was just, when I was making this talk yesterday and today, I was going through some recent images, and this is from August. I was out in Monterey Bay as a guest naturalist, and there were a couple whales surface lunging, and you can see a little, gosh, I don't seem to have a pointer here, but you can see little anchovies slipping out the sides there, feeding on anchovies in Monterey Bay, as our whales often do. And just the scale of them. I mean, if we put a human in here, you know, that's like a swimming pool inside the animal's mouth, right? And this has been something I think we should take the moment to really appreciate the scale of these animals that we share space with. I mean, I personally am in the ocean as much as I possibly can, enough that I, kind of probably an hour a day if I'm getting out surfing, sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 hours, and not quite enough really to be called a marine mammal, but I'd love to be. And the fact that we share our environment with these animals, and further still, that so many of our decisions really affect their space, and this the reality of humpback whales today is that we have these these incredible populations that are generally around the world. Most humpback populations are showing signs of real health, right? They've recovered broadly, in most cases, quite well from 20th century industrial whaling, and yet the environment that they recovered into after we stopped killing them is now radically different than the environment that they were hunted out of 200, 150 or so years ago, 100 years ago. So I want to kind of weave that in here all the way along with this reality that we are very much the determinants of their population health. What we do as individuals, yes, but mostly as a society, as collective action, as governments, as the way that we manage the oceans and, quite frankly, the climate too. Um, One of the really exciting parts of this for me, I mean, it's very odd to me, this path that I've gone. I spent 30 years guiding Antarctic expeditions mostly, but nature tourism around the world, and in particular to Antarctica, and really imagined myself in a field biology space. And now that I have completely pivoted to scientist, I'm actually not a field scientist. I do most of my work at a computer, but yet I do get out in the field. And when I do, I'm often seeing animals that I know, oddly enough, not from time with them as individuals, but with time with them digitally as pixels. And in this case, this is a really fun one. We photographed this whale. It was the first time I had seen this whale. I only saw her once. Name is 10076, or that's her number, CRC 10076. We subsequently named her Humpback. She was first encountered in 1986. We don't know how old she was at the time, but you can see by her tail she's a quite a stout and old whale. You could just hear how much bigger than the other whales she is. And humpback whales and great cetaceans all continue growing throughout their lifespan. She was just audibly, visibly, yes, absolutely, but most impressively, audibly larger than the other whales around. And this, you can see the sort of the edge softening there, the old tail, and yet she had a calf with her. She had this arched back, which is very hard to see. I mean, humpbacks have their name for having humpback fluke, but also had this wild sort of scoliosis in her spine, and yet her calf looked quite healthy. And it's pretty neat to see. Here's a whale that absolute minimum was 40 years old, probably a good bit older. Probably these animals have a life expectancy much as we did pre-Western medicine. And so, being out among, I'm now 52, being out among animals that are my age or older is totally realistic out there. Although, given the history, given that, when I was born, there were very few humpbacks in the North Pacific. In the early 70s, population estimates had maybe 1,000 animals. Now we think that there's better part of 30,000 animals. So they've recovered from being hunted down to probably about 3% of pre-whaling numbers in the North Pacific, which is an ocean where they were relatively spared compared to other parts of the world, like in Antarctica, where 99.8.9% of blue whales were hunted out. So imagine what that does to a population structure and culture. And so when you're out among these whales, you're mostly seeing kindergartners, you're mostly seeing adolescents, juveniles, young adults, and a few Great Danes like this. To me, that's my science has been following individuals and tracking them, but it's also been kind of a large part of my life with great joy. In this case, digitally, I could know this animal and then see her once. But also, there's animals whom I feel like I've developed, well, certainly it's a one-way relationship, but relationships with. I'd seen Fran many times. And so when I was sent photos of her tail back in 2022 in August, I was sent or it was early September, I think. I saw photos of her sent to me. I recognized her instantly. And unfortunately, she washed up having massive blunt force trauma killed her, hit her spine, shattered her spine, and this was shocking because this is a whale that we knew very well. An anonymous whale being killed doesn't reduce the tragedy at all. But when it's an animal that we felt like we knew and, who was friendly around ships and was very familiar to so many of the whale watch naturalists, it really hit home. And so when the San Jose Mercury News ran this story as a front page story, this heart-wrenching, killed by ship, will her calf survive? Really, well, I'm not going to say it reduced the tragedy in any way, but it definitely created a little bit of a legacy that I think hopefully we can build on. And I'm kind of getting to the story of populations and getting to the story of migratory patterns. But the way that we get there is through knowing these individuals. And I think that's kind of a critically important and insightful way to explore these animals. So, the story of Fran, well, her calf, Aria, this is Aria in front and Fran in back. Aria was named after Fran was killed. So at this point was just called, Fran's calf, 2022. We knew Fran particularly well. She was a very site faithful whale. She was seen in Mexico a few times, and she was seen in California every single year from when she was a calf to when she was 17 years old in 2022, excepting one. She wasn't seen when she was a 1 year old. Excuse me. Um, and so she was super consistent. She called the back of Monterey Bay home. That doesn't mean that was the only wet place she fed, but she was very consistently to be seen deep in Monterey Bay and very consistently showing up around boats and such, and often mugging boats and such. So when she showed up with a calf, the first time she brought a calf to California as a 17-year-old, it was really celebrated and really exciting. And we got great photos of her and her calf, this rather distinct dorsal of her calf. And we had great photos of the calf's tail, this perfect photo by I think is Tim Huntington. Well, so I figured that when Fran was killed, probably her calf was lost as well. Or if not lost then, probably wouldn't make it, probably 8 or 9 months old. That's a bit early to usually be separating from mom. But we held out hope. We certainly did. And I figured that we would be able to identify the calf, even though their flukes do change in that first year and some. So that was in August, September, and then all the way through until the next April, we had no sighting or sound from Aria. It was named as a song of hope, named by a pretty enthusiastic ocean conservationist, a fellow named Aon, a young conservationist, and I love the kind of advocacy he does. But yeah, it was so exciting when in April of the following year, I get a call actually from Dane McDermott out on a whale watch boat, calls me up and says, Ted, I think I've seen Aria. Can you confirm this? Like, if I send you a photo, and it wasn't this great photo that came from Kate Cummings, but it was a decent enough photo. I got it. I ran it through my software. Um, and was able to confirm looking at it and also with the software, yes, this is the whale. And happily, Aria's gone on, and saw her and photographed her this past April. And to me, getting to know individuals like this has been a huge part of the joy of this work. So a little sidestep back to what I've jumped past. Obviously, now we're talking about identifying individuals by the unique patterns and shapes and scarring on their tails. So you can see the progression of this whale's tail, where the pigmentation changed. Also, scarring changed. Those barnacles as a calf, in July 2022, photo by Tim Huntington there. Those barnacles as they grew, eventually they would make a ring that those scars will be with the animal for the rest of their life. So from probably July, that's probably a 7 or 8 month old animal. Those scars stay for the rest of the life. Also, that trailing edge is quite distinct. And this is this photo ID individual recognition has been done for 50 some years. It's a wonderful technique, very, very, very powerful, because when you can track individuals, great, you can learn individual stories, but also it allows us to do population scale studies in a way that just counting animals anonymously is much, much more challenged to do. We can do things like mark recapture studies where we say, okay, this year we saw 1,000 whales, and then the previous year we saw 1,000 whales, and there were 100 whales that were in both populations. So hey, great. If that's the case, and we did that study perfectly, and we sampled perfectly, 1,000 whales one year, 1,000 whales the other year, 100 whales overlapping. If we did that study perfectly, that means that we have a population of 10,000 whales. Well, perfect doesn't really happen in nature quite so, but that's the basic technique that we use to be able to monitor populations across any set of animals that we're able to do this kind of mark recapture with, plus longitudinal studies looking where animals go and such. And so really great to do, but very, very, very labor intensive. So what we did in the beginning of my PhD, the beginning of Happywhale, was taking this vast chunk of data that we had aggregated from so many researchers over the years and seeking to automate it, use AI computer vision. I grew up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, going to school in the Bay Area. And so this tech space was very much my home, but yet also I thought of the wilds as you know, I was comfortable with technology, but really more honestly at home in the wilds. And so the idea of taking sort of these AI technologies as they were developing and applying it to this seemed to me something that we could really benefit from. And so what we've done is automated image recognition such that every single one of these animals is recognizable. These are a bunch of humpback whale tails that I photographed in Antarctica a couple of years ago, and aggregate them all into one vast database where each animal is as recognizable as any other. Great thing about the computer, it has infinite recall. So we now have 112,000 humpbacks from around the world, and I can confidently put in a new photo if it is a good photo, if it's a good to great photo, and I don't find a match, I can be very confident. If you need to know the statistics, I can give that to you in tight bounds, 97 to 99% chance that we have a new whale in that case. Or if we did find a match, 99, that little percentage, yes, there are mistakes in here, but we're actually making a lower rate of mistakes than the human observers back before we automated this. And the great part about that, we built the AI with humans at the center of it. We are not trying to remove the jobs of people. We're really just trying to take the labor intensive part of data processing away so that we can focus on the understanding parts. A little bit of an example of how this works. Here's a horrible photo. And so I took this photo just last weekend. My cousin was in town. I was kind of showing him around. I was driving along West Cliff Drive in Santa Cruz, West Side. And as I came by the lighthouse, I saw a whale out in the bay. And so I pulled over into the lighthouse parking lot, and I actually called, or I asked my wife to run on over. We live about 5 blocks away. I said, hey, grab my camera. I was just sitting out on the table. And, could you come down here? There's a whale. I really want to know who it is. So I took this picture. By the time she got there, the whale was further away. It was right next to the wharf in Santa Cruz at the time. As I got this picture, really horrible picture, right? Blew it up, did a whole bunch of sharpening and contrast and stuff. Another picture, even worse. I mean, like, there's just nothing to ID from here. But, okay, sure. But got this algorithm. Why not try it? And it gives me this suggestion. And I'm like, okay, well, suggested that both of them was the same whale. And hey, Jazz, well, that's a whale that I've seen a couple times before. I've seen Jazz in 2017 and again in 2022. And, could be. We don't confirm a match unless we can visually see, oh, yes, that is that whale. We trust the computer to give us the best suggestions because statistically we've proven that it does very good at that, does very, very well, giving us the best suggestions of what has the most proximity in feature descriptions, right? We basically take a tail and turn it into a whole bunch of math, a multidimensional body of math in a multidimensional feature space. And then you take your test. So we have, in this case, 112,000 such whales. So imagine 112,000 little clusters of data in a multidimensional space, and you take a test whale and you throw it in there and you run that same feature description process and you say, okay, which other whales is it closest to? And is it close enough that it's above a threshold that we think it's a match? And in this case, this whale came up. That's Jazz. Okay. But I wouldn't say that that is Jazz until I can see some feature. In that top photo, if you squint, you can kind of pretend you see some of those killer whale rake mark scars, which was how jazz got its name, from sort of sheet music notes, or that the circles are those barnacle scars. You can pretend you see it, but I don't see it that confidently. However, the next day, we received some photos from a naturalist on Santa Cruz Whale Watch, the vessel Velocity, from Cindy Mingus, who came out of the harbor, and the vessel turned north, and they photographed Jazz out in the harbor right next to where I saw the whale. So I am now confident that this is in fact a correct match. So I was pretty excited by that. Sort of fun. We've also ID'd tattoos. Somebody sent me this tattoo photo, and asked me if we knew their whale, and sure enough, we did. They got the tattoo from a photo they took, and then later on but they didn't have the photo anymore, and but we did know their whale. Maybe more importantly than IDing tattoos is a whale up in Alaska. Southeast Alaska catalog 2156. Well, this whale was actually hogtied in fixed gear in Tennecky Springs area, and was cut free. And in the process of it, some very, very poor quality photos were taken of the tail, just bits of it here, bits of it there. I actually mosaicked a couple pieces together in Photoshop and to try to figure out who this was, and came up with this match. And so we know that this whale not only survived, but has continued to be seen quite frequently in the same area over forthcoming years. One of the most exciting things, it's a tangent from what I'm mainly talking about here tonight, but one of the most exciting things we're doing now is expanding the photo ID capacity. A couple, 3 years ago, we built an algorithm to identify dorsal fins, and it works quite well. We built it on many, many species and are really now just oops, wrong way, really now getting it to work at its optimal abilities. And in collaboration with Cascadia Research Collective, we've applied it to Risso's dolphins and found that it actually does better than human matching with Risso's dolphins. This is kind of an ideal case where you have a dorsal fin that has edge features, has surface features, has pigmentation, has scratching and scars. So it's kind of an ideal case. But since then, we've started in on saying, okay, great, let's throw open the floodgates, send us your Risso's dolphin photos, working with research collaborations and also citizen science. And we've now identified over 800 individual Rissos in California, and over 600 in the Azores. So it's just a really fun path to be going down, saying, hey, we can do this kind of broad scale study and really lower the barriers. Many of these things, Cascadia had previously only worked on Rissos in Southern California because they were confident that they could manually match in that relatively smaller population, as opposed to Monterey Bay and these Northern California waters, where we can regularly have pods of 100, 200, 500 animals actually manually matching that would be, weeks in the office after a single day in the field. And so breaking that barrier, breaking the bottleneck of kind of data throughput really opens up some fantastic sort of fertile fields to better understand these whales. So again, a tangent, but I'm going to thank Jody Frediani for this wonderful photo. This is an initiative I'm really excited about. I want us to be able to do for species, especially species in critical environmental and population peril, what we've been able to do for humpbacks. Humpbacks have shown real resiliency. Yes, their populations are fluctuating and changing, and we're seeing signs of ocean health through that population signal. But boy, gray whales need, I mean, for one, these are our closest whale companions, or rather, not companions so much as neighbors, right? They're the near coastal whale. They were the first whales to be hunted to near extinction. They were the first whales to be to be protected. They were the first whales to be removed from the endangered species list. In 1994, they were removed from the endangered species list, has recovered, and now in the last 6 years, over 50% of their population has disappeared. Yes, it's because of climate change. Yes, it's because of ocean impacts, ship strikes, entanglements, all the things that we do in the ocean. But it's out of sight, out of mind until we recognize, and quite frankly, I think recognizing individuals goes a long way to seeing these animals as the beautiful creatures that deserve our respect and support and protection. So starting in on that. And if anyone knows anyone who wants to fund such a thing, please let's talk, because it's not a small ask. But all of this together has really enabled a lot of great kind of unleashing of potential. And one of the fun parts about that is a large portion of the database. It's sort of a large minority, right? Most of the data in Happywhale now, most of the data that we brought together is actually researcher based, but a large minority is from citizen scientists. And that's just so powerful because, especially now where science support is sort of been eviscerated, scientists can't be everywhere all the time. And yet every day, how many whale watch boats are out there? How many expedition ships are out there with people well armed with fantastic camera gear? So all we ask is that people set their cameras, current date, time, use GPS if you have it, shoot photos, know what a good photo ID photo looks like. For a humpback, yes, it's the tail, but for a gray whale, it's actually that dorsal surface, along the back, a lateral view. And each species has different characteristics that we focus on. And then just submit to Happywhale, and we take it from there. And where that's allowed us to go is into this global space of here's mostly humpback whales. That's I didn't really realize it, how much of a low-hanging, relatively easy fruit humpback whales were, but so many things about them. I mean, this whale that lifts a 5-meter banner saying, "This is my ID," with so much information on it, it really, really makes for effective ID. And as such, we've gathered there's just these huge data sets around the world, as I said, now over 112,000 individuals globally. So in the North Pacific particularly, that comment that we have identified almost every living whale in the North Pacific. Excuse me a second. You know, that's a hard one to back up with statistics. If I had to guess, I'd say I bet 80% of North Pacific humpback whales we have IDs for. As you can see, kind of by the density of lines and circles here, each of those circles, the number in it is the number of encounters in that area. So these numbers are a bit old. This is from, I think this slide is from February. But we have like 50,000 encounters identified in Hawaii and along the U.S. West Coast, North American West Coast, 100,000. In the Western Pacific, far less. This has come up a lot since then. We've had some really fantastic Japanese collaborators come online and share some quite large data sets that they previously didn't feel comfortable sharing and so on. And so we've learned a lot more from there. And I guess what I'd like to turn to talk to in the time I have left here is about migratory patterns, because this is the piece that, well, migratory patterns and the fate of populations here. So we went into this, it's really kind of amazing. I mean, given that we started hunting these whales hundreds of years ago, we just started hunting them and then quite frankly learned a lot about them through hunting them, but with really no knowledge. I mean, the first commercial whaling, you would say, um, I think it would be safe to say that the first commercial whaling was by the Basques in coastal Spain, and it was probably on gray whales, right? But then the Basques learned the techniques for how to hunt these great whales and commercialize them, and well, it just went nation by nation. No of the oceanic nations really can be absolved of a part of this, and quite frankly, I don't think we need to feel guilty about it quite so. And the evolution of society is that we do things that maybe aren't in our own or the planet's or any other species, especially best interest. We have the remarkable ability to learn. Unfortunately, we sometimes forget as well. But in the North Atlantic, there was a gray whale and it was hunted out. It was hunted to extinction. That hunting then moved on to bowhead whales and right whales, and that was funded particularly early on by Dutch merchants, Basque whalers, Dutch merchants, and then it spread through European and then American business entities. And the U.S. was a major uh, well, operator in and funder of whaling around the world, such that the first North Pacific commercial scale whaling was largely by the US. And we managed to wipe out, the majority of populations of all the great whales up here. So 20 some years ago, when the splash study started, we knew that we had taken them all. We had started protecting them. We had seen their populations start to recover and didn't have much in the way of numbers of it. We still didn't even know who went where. And in fact, it was in the early 2000s still generally thought that whales, humpback whales in California, were probably on their way to Alaska. Well, the SPLASH study, structure, population, level of abundance, and status of humpbacks, was really a pioneering effort that used photo ID and genetics to look at where whales move, and that same technique that I talked about, mark recapture study, to estimate the populations. And it came up with this migratory pattern to find that, hey, most of California's whales go to Mexico in the winter and Central America, and most of Alaska's whales go to Hawaii in the winter, and lesser degrees, a rather complicated picture, but ironically, this is the simplistic version. And so when I started my PhD, it was really, my initial thought was really like, hey, can we automate this? B, can we update these numbers that haven't really been updated since Splash, except for in certain spaces and places along the way? And can we make this thing really accessible? Can we make it so that I can go out whale watching and I can photograph a whale and I can know that whale's story as soon as possible? Well, the answers to all that is happily quite yes, but so much detail. And take you on a quick walk through a few little charts. I guess to me, it's like it's really cool to look at this very correct and yet incomplete graphic from Splash. And when we start to get deeper in this, we have to say, okay, well, so were we sampling everywhere we needed to sample? And how do we know that the whales go here and not elsewhere? So this is what I've recently been diving into after completing my PhD. The real question remained in terms of publishing the migratory patterns that we found. How do we know what's what? And I had to dive into this like exploration of effort, in particular to say, okay, if we've counted so many thousand whales in California and so many thousand whales in Mexico, but only, 2,000 whales over off in another archipelago. Well, how do we know that our effort is balanced so that we can actually say what percentage of whales go where. So dove into this, and okay, sorry, it's a boring graph, but there's some pretty cool stuff in here that actually reveals a lot about what we've done more than necessarily about the whales. North Pacific whales are divided into all these subpopulations, and these populations have a certain integrity. They have biological realities to them, but their edges are really fuzzy, right? So what we say with these humpback whales back here, they have maternally directed site fidelity. They go to where their moms show them for the rest of their lives, most of the time. Not always, not perfectly, but they're born on the way to or in a winter low latitude breeding area. Hawaii, Western Pacific, Philippines, Southern Japan, Ogasawara, Japanese islands, Mexico, starting like Vallarta and on down there, Sayulita, Vallarta, up a little bit north of there, and all the way down to Panama. Just a few of our North Pacific whales get down to Panama. None have ever been seen further south from there. And then out in the Revillagigedo Islands, the Socorro Islands, that red spot on the right side of your screen there, just west of mainland Mexico. So they do this maternally directed site fidelity, and we have, and the Splash study did a really good job partitioning effort out, getting people in the field everywhere that we knew that humpback whales were. And when I say we, this predates my time. I'm saying all my wonderful colleagues who brought so much to bear that's enabled me to do what I've done now. And so when I look at our studies, this is effort over time compared to the population, the estimated population of each area. And it's quite neat. Notice the vertical scales are different for each map. And I want to point out actually California is quite a special and unique place where in California, by these estimates, this is saying if we take the estimated population of each area, what proportion of that population did we measure each year during efforts there? And so in 1991, by this accounting, in California, 60% of the whales were sampled. So I got to sit down with John Kalmbakidis and talk this through and say, hey, does this make sense? Like, because actually the regional population estimates are bit tentative, good science behind it, but there's a lot of assumptions in it and some patchy bits. And he said, yeah, that was when we really put out our first big field efforts. And so it's pretty remarkable to actually in 1 year sample 60% of the whales. But then the story, of course, is that that those populations were changing. So what was 60% of the whales in 1991 would be just a tiny percentage of the whales now because that population has grown so much. So this is per region over time. The data from my PhD fed into this model, but this was a model led by Andre Punt of University of Washington, for International Whaling Commission Scientific Committee. And if you look at it, you think, wow, there's some pretty striking growth in there. Really remarkable. I mean, these are animals that were basically wiped out from healthy oceans. And then, good conservation lesson there. We stopped killing them. And that is a core first lesson in conservation. If you want the thing to thrive, stop killing it, right? We don't always learn that too quickly, but so it was. That the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the Endangered Species Act, and whaling was ended. The last whaling station in the U.S. was in Point Sao Pablo, in the San Francisco Bay. It closed when those two laws were enacted. Said no more whaling, right? And so now it is illegal to harm a marine mammal. It is illegal to harm an endangered species. And watch this space, because that definition, what constitute harm, may well change here, because the current administration believes, quite frankly, well, if you were the subject of these laws and I burnt down your house right now, that would mean that I'm harming you. But the proposed new definition of the Endangered Species Act, harm, and Marine Mammal Protection Act, harm, would mean, in effect, I could burn down your house and not cause you harm, under these laws. Personally, I think that's pretty fraudulent. But anyway, such as it is, we define that these animals could not be harmed and their habitats as well had to be protected. In the 70s, not killing them was the first and most important step. Now, protecting their habitat and their space is the most important step. But so what we see here is the growth of each of these populations. You've got a mix here, both the wintering breeding area populations, most notably Hawaii being the biggest, and the feeding area populations, such as in pink there, Southeast Alaska, Northern British Columbia, in olive there, Eastern Aleutians and Bering Seas. These are the three, two feeding areas, one breeding area. And you'll notice a pretty striking thing there. Climb, 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 and then a sudden drop. Well, yeah, that's climate change. That's the marine heat wave. I'll get back to that. But just talking about this effort, I think I'm going to mostly skip this. But the point of this talk here is a log scale of effort growth over time as population growth over time. Our efforts kept growing year by year, but the populations were also growing. So on balance, what do we have? We have a situation where we've detected a lot of animals, but we've detected them at different rates through time. And so what does that mean? Well, what it means is that we have to do a little bit of adjustment. I'm not going to dwell on that because I think I'm talking a little longer than I expected, but I do want to point out this bit about, well, I'm going to focus here on California whales now. In California, as of a few months ago, we had identified 6,500 humpback whales. Now that's all time. That's all from well, I guess our earliest California photos that I have access to are from the early 80s, up through like whatever the days before I pulled this data out. Oh, in my notes, it was in April of this year. So we've probably added quite a few hundred whales more since then. But if we look at everywhere we've seen a California whale, well, you've got some over there in Russia, you've got some over there in the Western Pacific, or one in the Western Pacific breeding areas. And actually, let's see, there were of California whales, several hundred encountered in Hawaii. So, wow, who knew some of our California whales migrate to Hawaii? But start drilling into it, and we see that, well, okay, so 3% of California whales have been seen in Hawaii. But as you start digging into that, it's usually they're seen there once, and though very consistently seen in Mexico. So what we have here is a certain amount of animals wandering, but the majority of cases following very consistent trends. And what I mapped out in this is that if we take each whale and we say, okay, what's your home range? Defined by our home region. And these are big regions we're using, right? Like California and Oregon, not, not Bay Area versus Southern California, but big regions, California and Oregon. 97% of encounters of whales seen mostly in California are seen completely in California. That is to say that if we define a whale's home region by where they've been seen more years than any other, and then when we say where were they seen most, 97% of the time, they're in their home region. So what we have is animals that very, very consistently follow the same patterns with this little bit of wiggle room. So what that looks like if I try to recreate that splash map with the full details is a really confusing picture, a really unclean picture, but where there are very dominant trends. And those dominant trends are, in fact, what Splash mapped out quite well, with a little bit of an exception, which is a bit of an interesting one, that like the Western Bering Sea, those whales, even though a lot of them go to the Western Pacific. The Western Pacific is kind of a social ghost town, I think. And so more of those whales go to Hawaii. I think that there's like a, go to the major population place a cultural popularity of going to Hawaii rather than going to the Western Pacific, where maybe the pickings are just slimmer. Maybe it's not as fun. Maybe the music's not as good. Maybe there's a lot better singers in Hawaii. Why is that? Don't know, but there's certainly a cultural aspect where these animals, they go and they will feed everywhere where the feeding is good, but they don't breed everywhere where there's the right environmental parameters for breeding. They go to popular places mostly, and they also go back to the same places again and again and again. Again, looking at it from the other side, kind of a little bit simpler, but that's only because there's less breeding areas in terms of for drawing the lines. But to focus in on California, our whales, here's where they go. Functionally, none go to the Western Pacific. Like I said, about 3% have been seen in Hawaii, But by the numbers, a few of them, and this is an interesting one, you've got this Mexican island breeding area. It's really just a little for a whale, a little like overnight, day and a half swim, hop, skip, and a jump away. But it's dominantly oceanic whales. Mexican islands are mostly Revillagigedos, Socorro Islands. They're mostly populated by Alaskan whales. Isn't that interesting? Just this little gap. It's not just what's closest, it's where do your well, I was going to say where do your people go, but where do your companions go, where do your familiar whales go? And yet there is mixing in these spaces. So astute observers here will notice that there's way more than 100% for where California whales have been seen, and that's because while we do have Central American whales that are faithfully going to Central America, they're passing through mainland Mexico along the way as a breeding corridor. And messy as these animals are, by our little, sort of boxes and categories, they engage in breeding behavior along the way. By contrast, looking at it from the south, Central America and southern Mexico whales very, very, very strongly, right there at the bottom, over 91% are going to California and Oregon. Further south you go, the more faithful it is to California. So yes, that's the closest breeding area, but it's not the determinant factor. Like if you look at the Revillagigedo Islands in orange here, you know, over a third of these whales are going to the Gulf of Alaska, right? They're sticking together, and they're not necessarily migrating together, but they're regrouping among like animals, and with that comes culture, as in their songs and their particular breeding behaviors, and of course the flow of genes. So we do have whales that go back and forth between Hawaii and Mexico, and we found a few cases, I think a total of 4, of whales seen in both in the same season. But the reality is that this is an extremely vanishing exception. We've seen like over 550 whales both in Hawaii and Mexico, that in their lives they went to both. But it's a tiny percentage that go from one to the other. And what that is, we honestly don't know. If let's say 3% of whales are going someplace unexpected. Do they bring with them, well, they might bring with them disease. They might bring with them culture. They certainly bring with them genes, but they might not spread those genes. And this is something fun to think about and work on. When they are in that foreign land, are they like, ooh la la, you sing very nicely. That's a different song than I've ever heard. Or is it shunned? Do they get there and they don't sing like the others? Well, and really interesting stuff. Ellen Garland down in the Southern Hemisphere has plotted the movement of song west to east across the Southern Hemisphere. And she believes moving from larger populations to smaller populations, much as music is made in the major metropolitan areas and then spreads out around the world, like London, a musical capital of the world, New York, the cultural capital of the world, that culture spreads from. Well, it seems to be Western Australia, Eastern Australia, and then spreading across the smaller populations across Oceania. Western South America, even into the Indian Ocean, where songs will move with these gradual evolutions, and then occasionally with a sort of a revolution, like when Gangnam Style got to the U.S. and it was suddenly all you heard was K-pop. Oh my God, and so sort of a cultural revolution. I guess that's happening again with that animated K-pop thing I've never seen the likes of. I don't actually have a TV, so but yeah, it's just super interesting stuff. And I'll kind of wrap this with just a little revisit to this arc of population and this dramatic drop. Well, I said it's because of climate, and I want to touch back on these migratory patterns while pointing out this major ecological change. In 2014 to 2016, the largest marine heat wave ever recorded sat along the US and North American West Coast, really had a huge effect in the Gulf of Alaska, huge effect in Southeast Alaska. We saw it affecting things here, but it affected populations differently. We actually, as Susan mentioned up at the top, about a third of Hawaii's whales disappeared. We think 7,000 whales were lost because not because the water was too hot for them, but because their feeding areas, their food was more dispersed, was deeper, and most of all was less abundant. So these animals dramatically declined in this time. California saw a change, right? Krill feeding was not good in California at the time, but we didn't see a population change. Mainland Mexico's population still continued to climb during that time because the animals prey switched to anchovies. So you might remember that humpback whales were really close to shore. It was great whale watching in 2015, 2016. Whales were in close to shore because they weren't feeding on krill further offshore. And their populations reflected that ability to prey switch. In Alaska, they might try to switch from krill to herring, but there weren't the animals around the food wasn't there for them to switch onto. So, so to me, it's a really striking thing, right? The history of the future of a baby whale 100 years ago was that it had a very high likelihood of having its life cut short by a whaler. Now that whale has a much better prospect, but it's growing up in different seas, right? So will this whale actually have healthy seas to live in, where one, there is enough food? To me, climate change is it's the 800-pound gorilla in this whole discussion. But then there's also other parts of it, which is that we are urbanizing their space, shipping lanes and crab traps and all the things in their space. The reality is that, when I look at this animal, this was my father's photo, rest in peace, dear dad, of a calf breaching. And when I look at these animals, again, another young whale, my photo, I cheat here, this is out in the Silver Bank, the Dominican Republic. I think about, how are we going to make decisions that allow them to live the healthy, thriving lives that we've been able to enjoy. And the greatest pleasure of my work now is the collaborative studies, getting to work with teams that are identifying the individuals using our software, and then doing really clever stuff like photogrammetry to measure the animal's health over time, photo ID allowing the tracking of the individual over time, and then drone-based photogrammetry and all these other mechanisms, genetics to track their health, to detect their pregnancy status and so on, and linking that to where they're migrating to, linking that to environmental parameters. This is the most exciting stuff to me. And yeah, and well, with that, bit of a rambling talk, but I really appreciate your interest and have to thank so many collaborators in this. There's so many, and especially, let's see at the bottom here, I say, and 8,000 citizen scientists. I actually, with my each research paper, published a supplemental material with the names of everyone whose photos were used in the data sets, and those ran to to 15,000 words and beyond. So really something that I've come to appreciate hugely. And with that, thank you.
All right. Wow. There's so much to take in, Ted. And so we might as well jump into questions. And yeah, we have also some in the chat. So Anjali, do you want to take that over?
Yeah, well, thank you again, Ted. You're doing incredible work, and the photos you shared were just gorgeous. We have a couple questions from people in the audience, and feel free to utilize the Q&A feature as we start talking if you have any other questions. So our first question is, any ideas how Hunchback got scoliosis?
I have none. I have no idea. And you know, unfortunately, I was looking back through the photos. You know, this is kind of one of the most interesting things that we have ahead of us is you know, this is fluke based work, and we can oftentimes see entanglement scars show up very well on flukes, killer whale rake mark scars show up very well on but there's so many other things about a whale's health and condition that are on other body parts. And now we're doing dorsal fin ID, so we're getting kind of more images of more of the body parts. But and then also, you know, going forward here, tying in you know, like, you know, things that allow us to look at the lifespan of the animal and lifetime of the animal, both with genetics and biopsy work and so on, but also just photogrammetry and things like that. I don't know, and I was hoping to see, you know, did that happen recently, or is that lifelong? Like, did this animal live, you know, at least 40 years and successfully breed through that? She was seen during splash, but I don't have pictures to say if she had that, you know, deformity back then. Um, so yeah, sorry, no idea.
Well, I mean, that makes complete sense, but it would be so interesting to learn a little bit more about how long
Yeah,
you had it for.
yeah,
Our next question is about Aria, Fran's cat.
yeah, yeah.
So first thing is, how old was she when Fran passed away? And then were there any chances that she could survive without her mother?
Well, she did survive, you know. Yes,
Mm.
yes, that's the great news. And it actually, at the time, okay, so she Aria Fran was killed in August of 2022. We don't know exactly when Aria was born, but let's see. I have it was really cool. One of my closest collaborators, Nicola Ransom, um, in Mexico, came up with a picture because she had photographed Fran, and she came up with an image of Aria in Sayulita in February of 2022. Let's see. I'll share my screen again here. Let's see if I can do this. So here's everywhere where Arya has been seen, really site faithful, like mom. That doesn't mean that Arya is not going out to the Farallon Islands. That doesn't mean that Arya is not feeding offshore and such. But you know, there's a bias here, right? Effort bias here. There's a lot more whale watch boats here and a lot more science work here than there is down the coast and up the coast and such. We do have, thankfully, quite a lot of effort. ACS San Francisco, thank you very much here. Out in the Farallons and around there, Aria hasn't been seen there. But the very first encounter of Aria is can't tell too much by that, but not a tiny fluke. So I'm going to say at the latest, Aria would have been born in January, maybe November, even, or maybe December, even November. So we're talking about being 8, 9, probably 8 or 9 months old, right? So when she was killed, and it made the front page news, and a friend, Janet Nielsen, up in Glacier Bay National Park, she said, well, we did have a case that seemed to be voluntary, seemed to be a natural split. Mom and calf separated when the calf was, when you same time period. It was, I think it was in late August. Mom and calf split, and that calf survived. In that case, they had followed that. So that was like, oh, well, that gives us a little bit of hope. Personally, I thought there was a pretty good chance that Arya had been killed by the ship itself. But typically, a calf will stay with mom through about a year, and it's kind of, I feel like it's kind of a like goes back south with mom and gets to that wintering area, gets to that breeding area, and it's kind of like mom gets to the door of the bar and it's like, I'm going in, kid, you're staying out. Oftentimes they'll separate when breeding behavior starts and competitive behavior starts. So yes, the calf was able to survive. Generally speaking, I think it's probably pretty rough for a calf to lose mom at that age. They're probably still nursing, but also learning from mom how to feed. And imagine how, quite frankly, scary it would be at that age to be alone and not be next to your mom as and guided to the good feeding areas and so on. Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy she survived. And then based off, do you think that her long-term health will be affected, like her immunity, especially being separated from mom that early?
I wouldn't think so. You're getting out of my area of expertise, uh, for sure, right? But and I'd want to ask someone like Rachel Cartwright in Hawaii, or others who've done so much work on, or Juke Robbins in Gulf of Maine, who've seen how calves develop and spent so much time in the field with them like that. But she when I saw her in April, she was in a mixed feeding group. She was on the periphery, kind of on the far side. She's basically an adolescent now. We would hope that she starts breeding. I mean, she successfully survived. We know that Fran, her mom, had another calf years before, was seen with calf in Mexico, but that calf didn't make it up to California. So she only really had one successful calving, and this calf is well on its way. I feel like there's, like I said, life expectancy, much like us, pre-Western medicine, very high infant mortality. What that is that 25%? Is that 50%? I don't know. And that kind of survivorship study is really what I'm looking forward for us to be able to contribute to. But then, a much lower mortality rate ongoing out for quite a long time, and most animals probably living into their 20s, 30s, and a few living on. We do know of a whale in Alaska, old timer, who was seen just in July recently, who was first seen in 1972. So at least 54 years old, and unfortunately don't have that 1972 photo by Chuck Giraz, but his family does, and other folks have seen it. Anyway, I think that Arya will grow up to be strong and healthy and happy, and be able to, hopefully thrive and bring calves here starting 7, 8, 9 years old, something like that.
That's wonderful. Our next question's from Roger. Do you have any data on the Sea of Cortez for humpbacks? Is there any evidence that there's been a decrease of humpbacks in the Sea of Cortez over the last 30 years?
Interesting. So over the last 30 years, no, the dominant trend would be an increase in humpbacks, right? But over the last 5 years, it might be a different story. Sea Cortez is really a curious one, and I'd love to dig into that deeper. There's what we see there. Well, for one thing, Cabo San Lucas, I think, for humpbacks is a bit like LAX, right? Like if you sit there in, anywhere at LAX and you see people walking by, they might have been just, flying up to San Jose, but they might have just flown in from Hong Kong. Like it's just this mixing area, right? And the Sea of Cortez seems to get a lot of that, like whales from all over. But it also seems to have some level of at least temporary residency of animals staying there and juveniles staying there and feeding there, right? There's a resident population of fin whales in the Sea of Cortez, and humpbacks are feeding in there. So you do have these like very low latitude, but relatively good feeding resources, such that animals are going in there and kind of doing a different thing than in most of the North Pacific, where it's pretty distinctively go north, feed, 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 go south, breed, and don't eat, right? There are some spots, there's definitely documented feeding in Nicaragua, documented feeding in Mexico, in like in Banderas Bay, and where they are feeding in Banderas, they're disproportionately juveniles. And quite interestingly, of those that aren't juveniles, disproportionately from very, very far away. It's not California whales feeding there. So what's happening in the Gulf of California? I think what happens there is that individuals, when they're young, are going into the Gulf of California and being like, "Whoa, this is interesting," right? In the year after they've left mom, 2 years after they left mom, when they're still in kind of this formative space of finding their place, they're probably going to go to where mom took them, which is probably going to be, well, from Mexico, it's probably going to be California, but it might be, somewhere further afield. They're probably going to go there, but they might wander a bit, and yet then maybe after a few years go back to where they were first born at. I think I've heard anecdotally in the last few years that while blue whale numbers really dropped there in just the last couple of years. Now, is that population loss or a change in migratory pattern? I don't think it's really affecting the southern Gulf of California, but further north, Sea of Cortez, it does seem to be that warmer waters have less productivity, and it's warmer there. So I think that there's been a recent relative decline. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, our next question is from Jessica, who says, "Love seeing all the whales in Pacifica these past few seasons. I've been told this is a resident Monterey pod that goes to Mexico to give birth, but otherwise
Hmm.
stays in our general vicinity. Anything else you can tell us about this pod?"
Well, the first thing is that I'd actually take issue with the word pod because I don't think it applies to humpback whales. Like, killer whale pods, yes. But humpbacks have this they have a very fission, fusion, fluid social dynamic. And I think that a good way to think of that would be like, think about the way people interact at a party, right? Party, you've got, there might be individuals that stick together, but there's a lot of like, yeah, chat, these 5 people and then those 2 people. And then that's what you see out in Monterey Bay or in the Farallon Islands a lot. But we also have this site fidelity, and that varies by scale. And so Pacifica, yeah, you have local residents, but that local, I don't think is tight enough that I would call them pods. Yes, almost all those whales are going to migrate to Mexico when they do, but they're not sticking together in this tight net. There might be individuals, and there are probably I love this. If you flip open, if you find a whale, any kind of whale book from the 70s or 80s, and it'll probably say that humpback whales are solitary. And it's like, well, yeah, after you kill 97% of them, and there's just not that many around, they're alone more often because there are just not many of them. But the reality is that they're very social. They're just social in a very different way from killer whales and such. So, or any of these like long-term, very close family knit animals. But they do definitely have associates, and I think that would be a good term for it rather than, or like feeding mates. But let's see. I think I kind of lost the thread of the original question. Yes, I think there are individuals that have an affiliation for that area and will come in and have gotten to know specific parts of, like, how fish shoal and along the coast of Pacifica, and yet will, with any change of local weather patterns, just as soon a whale that's seen in Pacifica is more likely to be seen out in the Farallon Islands than a whale that's seen frequently in Monterey Bay, and much more so than a whale that's seen frequently in Southern California, even though we consider all of them same population. There's quite a lot of fluidity and gray areas in there.
Thank
It's,
you.
I just want to say it's interesting though, the way humpbacks do cooperative feeding.
Yeah.
So it's like they come together to whether it's bubble feeding or a few of us were in Monterey Bay a week ago, and just seeing them work together with the anchovies just under the surface. And then, so yeah, it's still interesting to think it's not really like a cohesive family like orcas, for instance, but.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you do get, you have these long-term associations up in Southeast Alaska, Gulf of Alaska, where they do this social bubble netting, right? And that's very environmentally driven. That's where these whales are feeding on the largest fish that they feed on, herring, right? So if you have this swimming pool-sized mouth and you throw it open, a krill has no chance. It is not going to swim out of your mouth into to get away, right? And even an anchovy, pretty unlikely to get away from that sort of swimming pool orifice coming at you. But if you're a herring, there's a pretty good chance that you could get away from this one whale. But if there's 10 whales that are coordinating and coming up together, well, that's the nature. And those animals that do that social bubble netting are consistently with the same animals. Now, whether that's because they're friends or because they all have the same breeding or rather feeding technique, so they by default end up together. Well, it's almost a semantic debate, really. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Yeah.
All right, our next question's from Nathan. We've seen how individual whales like Fran and Arya carry powerful stories. Do you think focusing on individual identities instead of just populations could shift how the public policymakers and even scientists approach whale conservation?
Yes, I do. 100%. Which is fantastic. That's just how we relate. It's kind of this like, I'm against animal cruelty. I would go a long way if I could reduce animal cruelty, but that's not what I do day to day. But nobody's going to threaten my dog. Like that's just a whole different emotional response, right? And I mean, I don't know, almost nervous about relating the story in this kind of public forum and context. But Fran was named by a fellow who adopted her in honor of his wife when she passed. And when she was killed, and I saw it, I was like, and I'm actually getting emotional about this. I've lost, loved ones. I took it upon myself. I said, I'm calling Ferd. I'm not going to just, I don't want him to just like hear about this. I want a friend to tell him. And that kind of power, that's how we relate. It's kind of like what was done to Free Willy of Free Willy, right? And if anyone wants a really interesting listen, the podcast The Good Whale is a really great one, really thought provoking. We care about individuals, and that is something these animals need all the help they can get, and they're oceans. I mean, we need to leverage the charismatic megafauna out there. I mean, I love the movie. What's the not March of the Penguins. What's the penguin movie?
Yeah,
Penguin cartoon movie. Come on.
okay.
Surf's Up? Is that it?
What's that? The penguins. Oh God, seriously. What's it? What is that movie? I'm blanking. Happy Feet. Yes, thank you. Happy Feet. Happy Feet 2. There's Bill and Will Krill, the only, celebrity krill ever to grace the big screen. Nobody cares about the krill, but through the whales, and especially through the story of individual whales, we can in fact care about the krill, and that's really what we got to do. So.
All right, this is a fun one from Judith. What age do the young females first enter the bar or start breeding?
Hi, Judith. When do they, well, it's generally considered 7 years, like, breeding area, 7 years. Biologically, I believe this is whalers doing this talking. I believe that they can reach sexual maturity earlier, right? And and it would suggest when you look at populations that seem to have growth rates of like upwards 11, 12, 13, even estimated Eastern Australia was estimated at growing at like 13% for a bit. That's really pushing biological potential. That's animals that are breeding early and often. Typically, we say they start breeding at 7 years and breed every other year. But certain individuals, like Flame up in Alaska, has had calf after calf after calf 4 years in a row. Now, Flame has only had 2 calves that have been seen past a single year. That doesn't mean those calves didn't survive, because we don't always detect them, mother to calf to adult. The flukes do change, and so we're going to miss some of those matches. But yeah, it's typically from 7 years and then every 2 years.
All right, the next question's from Ray. This feels very Bay Area, Silicon Valley. What do you see as the next major breakthrough in AI and machine learning that could further transform our understanding and conservation of whales?
For me, it is definitely being able to ID many species by many different and basically any information stream. But then I think as a breakthrough, um, being able to integrate various basically forms of multimodal information. In terms of the impact on conservation, I believe that, honestly, back to the previous question too, being able to tell these animals stories, using, I mean, like, I'm nervous about this, but I'm also really hopeful about it. Basically, using AI to tell animals stories in a way that look, in Happywhale, we have all this information, and yet a lot of it is not very readily extractable, right? I go out on a whale watch boat, and I can, as a guest naturalist, I can photograph a whale, I can take a picture of the back of my camera, I can identify that whale and tell people about that whale. When I was out there with Hunchback, I was like, whoa, first seen in 1986. Look at that. That whale looks old, and here I've got the data to show it. But then there's all this other data in there. This whale, one photo from 10 years ago might show a entanglement scar here. And having a tool that would aggregate that and extract it and make it readily accessible, I think will be a major breakthrough in not just in the interpretation, but actually our ability to synthesize the data. But yeah, that's computer vision, but also data integration.
Okay, next question's from Kim, who asks, have you found using drones affects whale behavior?
Oh, wonderfully. Not no at all, but it's pretty light. Humpback whales, I don't think I have heard of cases of baleen whales being affected by drones. If you think about it, like, how often when they're surface lunging and there's gulls everywhere, and it's like, there's another thing flying up there, no big deal. Now, when they are quiet, and if you fly a drone down real close to them, certainly it could disturb them. But in terms of a way to study them, it's incredibly powerful. I do know that odontocetes, some like the beluga whales, are pretty sensitive. They'll be like in their resting areas. There's places, these river mouths, that they'll go to rub dead skin off of them. You fly a drone down low enough to get a good image. And then you might actually disturb the animals, and hence most of the science is done with drones that, well, for one, drone work over whales is almost always done, well, the science work is always done under some kind of permit that's had some kind of environmental review. But I think drones are an incredibly powerful tool to see more of the animal. I mean, when we're out there from the surface level, we sort of see 2% of the animal 2% of the time. Well, with a drone, you're suddenly like, oh, look, there's the whole animal. Isn't that cool? Yeah, so they're super powerful and pretty light on the disturbance front, which I'm so fond of. I mean, photo ID, biopsy, where we just take a tiny little dart, as compared to, gosh, 50 years ago, how did you study a whale? You harpooned it, you dragged it up, and then you chopped it open. well, then you've got a dead subject. And even the first Mark recapture was shooting spikes into the whales with numbers on them, and then the whaler would send that spike back to the Discovery expedition team in the UK, and then you had 2 points and a dead subject, which, yeah, we can do a lot better than that now. Slight different topic. I see Kate Spencer in the chat that whales are singing live. Now is a really special time in Monterey Bay when many of the animals are already leaving, already starting to show up in Mexico in northern parts. But this is like when it's like that the hours before you're going to a concert, right? And you're humming the tune and you're excited about, oh, I'm gonna go out to the club singing the tune. Whales here are singing now, and you can hear it on the Mbari hydrophone. She put a link in the chat there. Super cool. Yeah.
All right, next question's from Yvonne, who says, is it known if whales communicate by voice to coordinate their bubble netting behavior?
That, if you ever have the chance of being around social bubble netting with a hydrophone in the water, I literally will get goosebumps thinking about it. It was one of the coolest experiences of my life. Thank you, Fred Sharp, Jody Frediani, others involved in that expedition. That was really special. So yes, they do communicate by voice. Yes, I mean, certainly. Is it language? That's for others to debate, not my field. But absolutely, literally, if you have a hydrophone in the water and they're setting up to bubble net, you will hear a call that preempts the bubble, the okay, now it's time to coordinate the rise together. It is just the coolest thing. Science tourism is the best.
Well, thank you. It looks like we're coming close to time, so I'll pass it over to Susan if there are any last questions, and then she'll go ahead and close us out.
Actually, Roger Harris had a good question. Has a birth or copulation by humpbacks been observed?
Yes. Yeah, there was a birth observed and filmed underwater in Hawaii, and we know who it was. I was hoping, I thought it'd be so cool if we kept seeing that mom and got a calf fluke. But yeah, gosh, could I come up with that? There was, gotta be gosh, I'm trying to think of the name of the author of the paper, but a couple folks out in Hawaii wrote a little short research note about it. It was really, really spectacular. There has been copulation observed as well, but it's pretty rare, for obvious reasons. They're kind of like, go out. There's been a lot of pre-copulation, what we call dancers, where animals are, male and female, doing all this intensive courtship dancing. One of the most incredible things to experience among the whales. But yeah, Captain Steve's team in Hawaii, were the folks that saw and documented the whale calving. Yeah.
We
Pretty
actually,
special.
yeah, we actually were in touch with that scientist to see if she would speak, and we almost had a date, so we'll try that for 2026.
Worthwhile.
But Ted, I want to ask you, while we have this audience, how does Happywhale get its funding? What?
Oh gosh.
Yeah, please.
Right now, we're incredible to be. I feel so privileged right now. We earlier this year got a large grant from Schmidt Sciences. It's about a 10 months of our budget from Schmidt Sciences, and with that, been able to hire a second programmer. And a director of operations, just really, really fortunate. So right now, that's the majority of it. But historically, my wife and I funded it personally up for the first few years, got a grant, then it kind of fell back on us. And then from early in COVID, I ran a tour company. My wife ran an indoor climbing gym company. And we were suddenly like, oh, wow, we're not so secure as we thought we were, and really scrambled. And actually, Happywhale has been self-sufficient since then. with some level of government grants. Fortunately, only about 10% of our money was coming from the US government through sub-awards, mostly from NOAA, and some from ONR, Office of Naval Research. Most of that is gone now in the last few months, but mostly it is tour operator subscriptions. Like if you want to use Whale ID, which is the instant app in the field, we offer that by subscription. And research collaborators writing us into grants or just paying, to use. That's what we go, like access first. If you can afford it, great. And now that I'm done my PhD, we kind of have to switch a little more to, okay, we need to be sustainable for the long term. But yeah, so it's mostly research collaborators, grants, and then we do a lot of adopt and name a whale. And our approach there is like, if the naturalists have names for the whales, great. We're going to put that into Happywhale. If somebody Joe Whale Watcher wants to name a whale, make a donation. You can do it to us. You can make it to ACS San Francisco. Awesome. Make a donation to somebody, and here's us. And so that works out quite well. And yeah, all together. That's the mix.
That is a way that, individuals anyway could support you by adopting a whale.
Yeah.
Okay, well, good.
Great Christmas presents.
Yeah.
So it's immaterial and infinitely valuable to adopt and name a whale for a loved one.
Good. All right. And we're approaching that season. So, and they just go to your website, and I assume it's pretty easy to follow. Okay.
Right at the top there, I think it says, where is it? It says, yeah, name your whale right along the top. It's got all the information there.
All right. Well,
yeah.
This has been fantastic. I mean, there's just been so much information, including, the legacy, and it's wonderful, all the work that you're doing. So we'd love to have you come back again, maybe as you continue to digest all this information and make more conclusions. But
always a pleasure. It's just such a great group, ACSF. You do such wonderful work. It's really a treat to share it with y'all.
Yeah, and please keep us posted when you do publish, or that the chapter that you've been able to share with us. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for all your time, all your work, and ACS community will see you on October 28th, where we will have Jody Frediani, who's going to talk about the inside passage of all of her annual expeditions up there to photograph whales. So
if anyone doesn't know Jody Frediani, the photography will be top-notch, really worthwhile.
Yeah.
Join that.
All right. Well, let's leave it as to be continued. Good night, everyone. Thanks again.
Everyone.